In the heart of Maplewood, a cozy, close-knit town where neighbors felt like family, Janet Turner and Adam Miller grew up as inseparable friends. From the time they were 6, they had been partners in every childhood adventure. Janet's house was across the street from Adam's, and their families shared cookouts, birthdays, and the occasional movie night, making them more like extended family than neighbors. Janet was the quieter of the two, soft-spoken and shy, while Adam was the classic small-town boy, outgoing and full of energy. Janet had always admired Adam's confidence, how he could approach anyone with a friendly grin, how he seemed to know the perfect thing to say to make others laugh. From a young age, she found herself drawn to him, though she hid these feelings deeply, unsure if Adam could ever see her as more than a friend. In middle school, Janet began to struggle with her weight. She was taller and broader than her classmates, and eventually, her build became the focus of her insecurities. She felt like a giant compared to the other girls, and as the years went by, she grew more self-conscious, always lingering in the background. Adam, however, never treated her differently. He was her rock, the friend who would take her hand and pull her into the spotlight when she tried to retreat. She valued that about him, and as they grew into teenagers, Janet's admiration for Adam deepened, even though she knew he didn't see her the way she saw him. By high school, Adam had become the center of attention, the star on the soccer field, the boy everyone liked. Janet stayed by his side, his ever-supportive best friend, though she quietly yearned for something more. Adam would occasionally date, usually girls from their school's cheerleading squad or soccer team. Each time, Janet's heart sank a little, but she smiled, supported him, and listened as he shared the ups and downs of his romantic escapades. Yet, despite everything, Adam never saw Janet as a potential girlfriend. To him, she was Jan, his loyal, slightly quirky friend who was always there for him, always laughing at his jokes, and always knowing just what to say to make him feel better. It wasn't that he was insensitive to her, it was simply that he had never thought about her in that way. She was a fixture in his life, a reliable constant that he had always taken for granted. After high school graduation, the two shared an emotional farewell as they went off to different colleges. Janet felt a sense of bittersweet excitement, knowing this was her chance to step out of her comfort zone and work on herself. She didn't want to change for anyone else. She wanted to feel proud and confident in her own skin, to finally let go of the insecurities that had held her back. But a small part of her hoped that someday Adam might see her differently. As she packed her bags and boarded the bus, Janet made a quiet vow to herself. This was her time. She would find the courage to be the person she had always wanted to be. And while Adam's image lingered in the back of her mind, she knew that for now she had to focus on her own journey. The college campus bustled with energy, and the kind of vibrant life that both thrilled and intimidated Janet. It was the first time she'd been on her own, away from the familiar faces of Maplewood and her constant shadow of self-consciousness. Here, no one knew her history, her insecurities, or her role as Adam's quiet best friend. This was a blank slate, and that realization filled her with both excitement and fear. In her first week on campus, Janet met her roommate, a bright-eyed, spirited girl named Lily. Lily, with her open smile and effortless charm, quickly became Janet's first friend. She didn't judge Janet for her appearance or shy nature. Instead, she invited her to join a yoga class and introduced her to the campus recreation center. At first, Janet was hesitant, her insecurities holding her back. But something inside her whispered that this was her chance, an opportunity to break free from the habits and thoughts that had held her back for so long. Her first yoga class was humbling but surprisingly empowering. As she struggled through poses, surrounded by students of all shapes and sizes, she realized that nobody was watching or judging her. It was a small revelation, but it sparked a change in her mindset. Janet started attending more classes, gradually expanding her comfort zone. She joined a walking group, then a cycling club. Each new activity made her feel stronger, more capable, and she found herself pushing past physical and mental boundaries she hadn't dared approach before. The weight she'd carried, both physically and emotionally, began to lighten over the months. She wasn't just losing pounds. She was shedding the insecurities that had weighed her down for years. As she embraced a healthier lifestyle, Janet noticed other changes, too. Her skin glowed, her eyes sparkled with newfound confidence, and she found herself smiling more. People began approaching her, drawn to her positive energy, and soon Janet was forming friendships that felt genuine and freeing. One evening, while studying with Lily, Janet received a text from Adam. He'd been busy with soccer and social events, but he still found time to check in on her occasionally. This time, though, the message was brief and casual, an update on his latest soccer victory and a quick, "Miss you." Janet's heart skipped a beat, a familiar flutter. But as she reread his message, she realized that something inside her had shifted. She still cared deeply for Adam, but she no longer felt the same sense of yearning. For the first time, Janet felt whole on her own, without needing anyone else's validation. Yet, as the semester drew to a close and the holidays approached, the thought of seeing Adam again crept into her mind. She wondered if he would notice her changes. Part of her hoped he would, but another part simply wanted to reconnect with the person who had been such a huge part of her life. Despite her growth and newfound confidence, Adam was still her best friend, and she missed him dearly. When winter break came, Janet returned home to Maplewood. She was greeted by her family's warm embrace and familiar surroundings, but something felt different. She realized that she was no longer the same girl who had left. Her family noticed, too. Her mother commented on her new glow, her father on her confidence. Their pride lifted her spirits, and Janet felt for the first time that she could finally live up to their expectations. During that break, she didn't see Adam often. He was busy with his own life, reconnecting with other friends and his soccer team. They exchanged texts here and there, but she sensed a growing distance between them. It hurt, but she knew that her growth wasn't about Adam's attention or approval. It was about becoming the best version of herself. When she returned to college for the spring semester, Janet was fully committed to her path. She took on more activities, pursued her studies with focus, and continued to develop her confidence. She started volunteering at a campus organization, speaking up in her classes, and even dated a little. Although nothing serious developed, these small steps helped her realize her own worth and what she desired in life. By the time summer arrived, Janet felt transformed, not just physically, but emotionally. Her weight loss journey had given her a healthier body, but her internal journey had given her something far more valuable, a sense of self-worth that was hers alone. She was ready to go back home for summer, not because she needed validation, but because she wanted to share her happiness with the people she loved. As she packed her things and boarded the train back to Maplewood, a sense of excitement filled her. She wondered how Adam would react to the new her, but more than that, she felt ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, knowing she had finally become the person she'd always wanted to be. Adam hadn't thought much about the quiet town of Maplewood during his year away at college. Life on campus was fast-paced, filled with the excitement of new friendships, parties, and his involvement with the soccer team. Though he occasionally missed his family and childhood friends, especially Janet, he was usually too caught up in the whirlwind of college life to dwell on it. As summer break rolled around, he felt a sense of nostalgia and comfort about coming home. He thought of the familiar streets, his mother's cooking, and long summer evenings spent goofing around with friends. But most of all, he thought of Janet, his lifelong friend, the person who knew him better than anyone else. Driving down Maplewood's tree-lined streets, Adam felt a rush of childhood memories. He parked his car in front of his house, grabbed his bags, and stretched, taking in the calm and familiar surroundings. He waved to a few neighbors and began heading toward his front door when, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a woman standing on Janet's porch across the street. Adam blinked, momentarily disoriented. The woman on the porch was stunning, her hair catching the sunlight as she laughed at something Janet's mother was saying. She wore a light, summery dress that flowed gently in the breeze, her posture confident and relaxed. She looked like someone from a magazine or one of those effortless influencers he'd come across on social media. His heart skipped a beat. His natural instinct to charm took over, and he felt himself smiling. He'd never seen her before, yet there was something familiar about her. Curiosity piqued, he casually strolled across the street, adjusting his shirt, ready to introduce himself. As he approached, the woman turned slightly, and Adam's jaw dropped. "Janet?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman, Janet, turned fully toward him, her smile widening. "Adam, it's good to see you." He stood there stunned. He'd known Janet his whole life, but he'd never seen her like this. She was radiant, glowing, with a confidence he hadn't seen before. It wasn't just her physical appearance that had changed, though that was striking enough. It was the way she held herself, a quiet grace in her movements, an ease in her smile. This wasn't the Janet he'd left behind last summer. This was someone else entirely, and for the first time Adam was at a loss for words. "Hey, Janet," he managed, feeling a little embarrassed by his own reaction. "Wow, I didn't even recognize you for a second." Janet laughed, a soft sound that sent an unfamiliar flutter through Adam's chest. "Yeah, I guess I've changed a bit," she said with a shy smile, though there was a hint of pride in her tone. Adam couldn't take his eyes off her. He stammered through small talk, asking her about school, her classes, anything he could think of to keep the conversation going. But his mind kept drifting back to the shock of seeing her this way. It felt strange, disorienting to see his best friend through such a different lens. For as long as he could remember, Janet had been his buddy, his confidant, the person he could go to for anything. And now, standing in front of him, she was beautiful in a way that made his heart race, leaving him unsure of how to act. They stood on the porch for a few more minutes, catching up in a slightly awkward but friendly manner. Adam kept stealing glances at her, trying to reconcile the Janet he'd known with the woman in front of him. As they chatted, he realized that her transformation wasn't just about her appearance. She spoke with a confidence and warmth that seemed to fill the air around her, drawing him in. Eventually, Janet's mom called her inside, and she gave Adam a small wave before disappearing through the front door. Adam stood there for a moment, feeling dazed. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts, but a question lingered. When did Janet become? This. Back at home, Adam tried to shake off the strange, lingering feeling. He unpacked, spent time with his family, and tried to focus on other things, but thoughts of Janet kept creeping back. That night, as he lay in bed, he found himself replaying their encounter in his mind. He remembered the way her eyes had sparkled, the lightness in her laugh, the confident way she had held herself. It was something he'd never noticed before, and he couldn't quite put his finger on why it felt so different. The next day, he met up with some of their old friends. They gathered at a local hangout spot, a small park near the river where they'd spent countless summer nights as teenagers. As they shared stories from college and laughed about old memories, Adam kept glancing around, hoping Janet would join them soon. When she finally arrived, Adam's heart skipped a beat. She looked effortlessly chic in a simple top and jeans, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, yet she radiated an undeniable confidence. He noticed the way some of their friends reacted, especially the guys who hadn't seen Janet in nearly a year. They greeted her with wide eyes and admiring smiles, some even stumbling over their words as they complimented her. Adam felt a pang of something unfamiliar, a prickling discomfort, as he watched his friends gravitate toward Janet, showering her with attention. He tried to join in the friendly banter, but his usual charm faltered. He felt strangely possessive, almost protective, though he didn't understand why. It was a feeling that took him by surprise, leaving him both irritated and confused. As the evening wore on, Janet laughed and chatted with everyone, her joy infectious. Adam found himself drawn to her, watching her every movement, captivated by the way she effortlessly held everyone's attention. The pang in his chest grew sharper as he saw how their friends looked at her, especially a couple of the guys who seemed particularly taken with her. By the time the sun set and they were all saying their goodbyes, Adam felt conflicted. He hadn't expected to feel this way about Janet, this confusing mixture of admiration, attraction, and jealousy. It was a strange, unsettling feeling, one he couldn't shake even as he walked home that night. Back in his room, Adam sat on his bed, staring out the window at the stars. He thought about Janet, the familiar friend who suddenly felt like a stranger, someone he wanted to know all over again. He knew something had changed inside him, and he couldn't ignore it. The realization hit him slowly but powerfully. I think I'm falling for Janet. As summer stretched out before him, Adam couldn't help but wonder if he was already too late. The days of summer moved slowly in Maplewood, marked by lazy afternoons and warm evenings spent with friends. For the first time, Adam found himself eagerly looking forward to each gathering, knowing Janet would be there. And with each encounter, his admiration for her grew, along with a rising, unsettling jealousy he could no longer deny. Their friend group, mostly the same group of high school friends, had naturally drifted during the school year, but summer always seemed to draw them back together. This summer, however, the dynamic had shifted in a way none of them could ignore, especially Adam. The change was most noticeable in how the guys treated Janet. Before, she had been one of them, the reliable, easygoing friend who was always down for a movie night or a late-night snack run. But now, her presence carried an undeniable allure, and the way the guys interacted with her reflected it. It wasn't just casual conversation anymore. They were eager, attentive, and obviously impressed. During one of their hangouts at the local diner, Adam watched as his friend Kyle leaned over to Janet with a grin, cracking a joke that made her laugh. The sound of her laughter, once so familiar, now sounded different to Adam, softer, more enchanting. Kyle's arm lingered on the back of Janet's chair, his gaze lingering on her face, and Adam felt a sharp pang in his chest. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was ridiculous. Janet had been his best friend since childhood. They'd shared everything, inside jokes, childhood memories, even late-night calls when they needed someone to talk to. But now, every time he saw her laughing with someone else, especially one of their friends, he couldn't help feeling a strange, possessive frustration. When Janet excused herself to go to the restroom, Adam seized the moment to lean over to Kyle, trying to keep his tone casual. "Didn't realize you were so into Janet these days," he said with a forced laugh. Kyle raised an eyebrow, a teasing smile playing on his lips. "Well, she's not exactly the same Janet we knew in high school, huh?" he said with a shrug. "She's really come into her own. It's kind of hard not to notice." The casual way Kyle said it made Adam's jaw tighten. He knew Kyle didn't mean anything by it, but hearing another guy talk about Janet like that made his blood simmer. He forced a smile, trying to keep his tone light. "Yeah, I guess so." By the time Janet returned to the table, Adam was still struggling to compose himself. He watched her sit down, her eyes bright and relaxed as she joined back into the conversation, oblivious to the effect she was having on him and everyone else. Over the next few weeks, Adam tried to get a handle on his emotions, but it was becoming more difficult. Every time they hung out, his jealousy flared up, especially when the other guys gave Janet attention. His easygoing charm around her began to falter, replaced by an awkwardness that he couldn't hide. One evening, their group decided to meet up at a bonfire on the outskirts of town. The sky was clear, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. Janet arrived late, having come straight from dinner with her family. She wore a casual dress and sandals, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked effortlessly beautiful. Adam's heart skipped a beat when he saw her, but he barely had time to greet her before their friend Jake rushed over to offer her a seat by the fire. Adam watched, his fists clenching unconsciously as Jake leaned toward Janet, smiling and animated. Jake was always the life of the party, and he was clearly making Janet laugh. It was the kind of laugh Adam used to get from her, the one that reached her eyes and made her face light up. Unable to hold it in any longer, Adam stood up abruptly and walked over to them, feeling like an outsider in his own friend group. "Hey, Janet," he said, trying to sound casual. "Want to go for a walk?" She looked up at him, surprised but intrigued. "Sure, Adam." She stood up, giving Jake a quick smile before following Adam away from the bonfire, the cool night air wrapping around them as they walked into the quiet darkness. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds coming from the distant crackling of the fire and the chirping of crickets. Adam could feel his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what to say, but feeling a pressing need to be alone with her, to have her attention to himself. Finally, Janet broke the silence. "Everything okay? You seemed kind of tense tonight." Adam let out a shaky breath, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He wanted to tell her everything, that seeing her with their friends drove him crazy, that he couldn't stand watching her laugh with anyone else. But he hesitated, afraid of the vulnerability he'd have to reveal. Instead, he looked at her, his voice softer than he intended. "You're just different, Janet. Everything about you feels different now." She stopped walking and looked up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "I've just been working on myself, Adam. I needed to find confidence, and honestly, I needed to feel like I could be happy with who I am." Adam swallowed, his heart aching with a mixture of admiration and regret. "I know, and it's amazing, Janet. You're amazing." She smiled, a soft blush spreading across her cheeks. "Thank you, Adam. That means a lot coming from you." They stood in silence, the weight of unsaid words hanging between them. Adam wanted to reach out, to tell her that he was feeling things he hadn't felt before, but he was terrified of ruining the friendship they'd built over the years. The fear of losing her kept him rooted in place. As they walked back to the bonfire, Adam felt a heavy sense of regret. He knew he had to confront his feelings sooner or later, but he couldn't shake the nagging thought that he might be too late. The summer was passing quickly, and he was painfully aware that if he didn't act soon, he might miss his chance with Janet forever. The days stretched on, and with each passing moment, Adam found himself spending more time with Janet, seeking out excuses to be close to her. Their once easygoing friendship had taken on a new intensity. Every conversation, every glance, every laugh felt charged with a tension he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, Adam suggested they visit a secluded spot by the river they used to go to as kids. It was a hidden gem, a small clearing surrounded by trees where the sunlight dappled the ground in patterns of light and shadow. Janet had agreed eagerly, and now, as they sat side by side on the riverbank, a comfortable silence settled over them. Adam tossed a pebble into the water, watching the ripples spread. He could feel her presence beside him, the warmth of her shoulder barely an inch from his. In the quiet of the moment, he became hyper-aware of her easy smile, the lightness of her laugh, the way she looked out over the water with a peaceful expression. Janet turned to him, breaking his reverie. "Remember the time we tried to build a raft here?" she asked with a laugh. "It fell apart before we even got in the water." Adam chuckled, shaking his head. "I had completely forgotten about that. You insisted we could make it work if we just found the right sticks." "Hey, it was a solid plan," she said with a grin. "If only we'd had some rope instead of that old shoelace." Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence, and Adam found himself glancing at her, drawn to the way she looked in the dappled sunlight. She seemed so different now, older, wiser, and yet still the same Janet who had been by his side through everything. The urge to tell her how he felt, to lay it all bare, rose up in him like a wave, but he pushed it down, still terrified of changing things between them. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, until Janet spoke, her voice soft. "You've seemed different this summer, Adam. Like you're holding something back." Her words took him by surprise, and he looked at her unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, looking down at her hands. "It's like, sometimes I feel like you're here with me, but part of you is somewhere else, or maybe there's something you're not saying." Adam's heart pounded as he struggled to find the right words. She was closer to the truth than he wanted to admit. "I guess I've just been thinking a lot lately, you know, about us." Janet's eyes met his, her expression unreadable. "About us?" she echoed softly. The words were on the tip of his tongue, ready to spill out, but fear held him back. Instead, he took a shaky breath, forcing a smile. "Yeah, about how lucky I am to have you as a friend. You've always been there for me, no matter what, And I know I don't always say it, but you mean a lot to me, Janet." Her face softened and she smiled, though he caught a hint of something else in her eyes, disappointment, perhaps, or longing. "You mean a lot to me too, Adam. You're my best friend." There was a hint of hesitation in her voice, a vulnerability that made his chest tighten. But before he could say anything more, Janet leaned back, her gaze drifting out over the water. They sat there for a long time, each lost in thought, the silence stretching between them like a chasm they couldn't quite cross. Adam felt the weight of everything left unsaid pressing down on him, filling him with a sense of urgency. He didn't want to keep holding back, didn't want to let the summer slip away without telling her how he felt. But every time he tried to find the courage, the words dissolved, replaced by the fear of losing her forever. The following week, they found themselves alone again, this time in Janet's backyard. The evening air was warm and thick with the scent of blooming flowers, and they lay side by side on the grass, looking up at the stars. It was a ritual they'd shared since they were kids, one that felt as comfortable as breathing. Janet turned her head to look at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever think about what it would be like if things were different between us?" Adam's heart raced, the question hanging in the air between them, loaded with possibility. He turned to look at her, his voice unsteady. "Different how?" She hesitated, biting her lip as if unsure how much to reveal. "I mean, we've been friends for so long, but sometimes I wonder if there could be something more." Her words left him breathless, the unspoken feelings between them suddenly laid bare. He searched her face, trying to gauge how much she meant, how deep her feelings went. "Janet," he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "I've been thinking about that a lot, too." Her eyes met his, wide and vulnerable, and in that moment, he saw a flicker of hope, a spark of something that had been hidden away for so long. She squeezed his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Then why haven't you said anything?" The question cut through him, and he realized just how close he'd come to losing his chance. He could feel the summer slipping away, taking with it the possibility of everything he'd been too afraid to say. "Because I was scared," he admitted, his voice raw. "I was scared of ruining what we have. But now I don't think I can keep pretending that I don't feel something more for you. I think I'm in love with you, Janet." A stunned silence filled the space between them, and for a moment he feared he'd said too much, that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. But then Janet smiled, her eyes filling with a mixture of joy and relief. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his skin. "I've been in love with you for as long as I can remember," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never thought you'd feel the same way." Adam pulled her into his arms, his heart pounding with a mixture of joy and disbelief. As he held her close, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a sense of rightness settling over him. This was what he'd been searching for, the missing piece he hadn't even known he needed. They sat there in the quiet of the evening, wrapped in each other's arms, the unspoken words finally given voice. For the first time, Adam felt truly at peace, knowing that he was exactly where he was meant to be right here, with Janet. As August rolled in, the days grew shorter, casting a bittersweet glow over the last few weeks of summer. Adam couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away from him. Every moment he spent with Janet seemed to reinforce what he already knew deep down. He couldn't imagine his life without her. But with each passing day, the end of summer loomed closer, and the thought of returning to college without her weighed heavily on him. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had to tell her how he truly felt, without hesitation or restraint. It was terrifying, the idea of laying his heart bare, but he knew that letting her slip through his fingers would be worse. One evening, Adam invited Janet to take a walk through Maplewood's old park. The air was warm and thick with the scent of pine and wildflowers, and the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden glow over the trees. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the gentle rustling of leaves and the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Adam's heart pounded as he thought about what he was about to say. He'd run the words over in his mind 100 times, trying to find the perfect way to tell her, but now, standing beside her, all his rehearsals fell away, leaving him with nothing but the truth. They reached a clearing by a small pond, the water reflecting the colors of the setting sun. Adam took a deep breath, turning to face Janet. "Janet, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been feeling for a while now." Janet looked at him, her expression soft but curious, and he saw a hint of anticipation in her eyes. "What is it, Adam?" He hesitated, gathering his courage, then spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "I know we've always been best friends, and I know I haven't always been the best at showing it, but I've realized that I don't just want you as a friend. I want something more. I think I've loved you for a long time, but I was too blind to see it." Janet's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and emotion flashing across her face. She opened her mouth to respond, but he continued, his words spilling out as if he couldn't hold them back any longer. "I was scared to say anything because I didn't want to lose you. You're my best friend, and I couldn't bear the thought of ruining what we have. But this summer, being with you, seeing how much you've grown, it made me realize that I can't keep pretending. I want to be with you, Janet. Truly. Completely." A tear slipped down Janet's cheek, and she wiped it away quickly, her smile radiant. She reached out, taking his hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "Adam, I've been in love with you since we were kids. You've always been my closest friend, the one person I could always count on. But I never thought you'd feel the same way." Adam felt a surge of relief and joy as her words sank in. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her as if he were afraid to let go. "I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it," he whispered. "I feel like I've wasted so much time." Janet shook her head, her eyes shining as she looked up at him. "Don't be sorry. I think we both needed time to grow, to become the people we are now. Maybe this is how it was meant to happen." They stood there in the fading light, their hearts finally in sync, the weight of years of unspoken feelings lifting as they embraced. Adam held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the rhythm of her heartbeat matching his own. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he had found what he'd been searching for all along. They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing memories and secrets, their confessions weaving together like pieces of a long-lost puzzle. Janet told him about her struggles, her insecurities, and how much it had hurt to watch him date other girls, thinking he'd never see her that way. Adam listened, his heart aching with regret but grateful for her honesty, for the chance to understand her fully. As the stars appeared in the sky above them, Adam took her hand, holding it tightly. "I promise, Janet, I'm not going anywhere. I want this us for as long as you'll have me." Janet smiled, her fingers lacing with his as she leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let's make the most of the time we have now. And when we go back to school, we'll figure it out, together." With a newfound sense of peace, they walked back through the park, hand in hand, their laughter mingling with the night air. They were no longer just best friends, but something more, two souls who had finally found their way to each other after years of longing and waiting. The days following their confession felt like a dream, each one blending seamlessly into the next as Adam and Janet navigated the beautiful new territory of being together. It was a subtle shift, yet everything felt different, a layer of warmth and anticipation wrapped around each moment they shared, each glance they exchanged, each quiet conversation that lasted late into the night. For the first time, Adam saw Maplewood through a different lens, filled with places where their childhood memories and new romantic beginnings coexisted. They spent afternoons at the riverbank, evenings watching the sun set over the fields, and late nights wrapped in quiet conversations under the stars. They relived old memories and created new ones, each one precious, each one binding them closer together. Their friends noticed the change almost immediately. At first, there were surprised glances and whispered comments exchanged whenever Adam and Janet shared a look or a laugh that lasted a beat too long. By the time they met up with their friend group at the park, it was clear to everyone that something had shifted between them. "So, are you two like a thing now?" Jake asked with a grin, glancing between them with raised eyebrows. Janet blushed, looking down as a shy smile played on her lips, while Adam simply laughed, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "Yeah," he said, giving Janet a quick, affectionate glance. "We're a thing." Their friends erupted into cheers and laughter, clapping Adam on the back and showering Janet with playful teases. It felt surreal, yet comforting to finally be open about their relationship, to share their happiness with the people who had been a part of their lives for so long. Over the next few days, Adam and Janet were inseparable, savoring every moment together as the end of summer approached. They fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, a blend of their deep-rooted friendship and the budding romance they'd both been waiting for. Every day felt like a new adventure, yet somehow like coming home. One evening, as they walked through the town's small, bustling square, Adam squeezed Janet's hand, a smile playing on his lips. "You know, sometimes I can't believe it took us this long." Janet looked up at him, her eyes warm. "I guess we were both a little clueless," she teased, nudging him gently. "But I think maybe we just needed time to grow. We're here now, and that's what matters." He pulled her closer, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Jan." She smiled, leaning into him. "Well, luckily you don't have to find out." They laughed, their voices blending into the sounds of the evening as they strolled through town, savoring the simplicity of just being together. It felt like every dream he'd ever had come to life, and Adam found himself constantly in awe of how happy he was, how right everything felt. As their friends grew used to their relationship, Adam noticed that the possessive pangs he used to feel when other guys looked at Janet had vanished. Instead, he felt a sense of pride, knowing that she was his, that they'd found their way to each other after years of waiting. He loved how her laughter lit up a room, how her confidence drew people to her, and he realized that it wasn't just her physical transformation that had captured his heart. It was everything she'd become, the person she'd fought to be. But as the days slipped by, the reality of the approaching school year loomed over them. The thought of leaving Janet, even temporarily, gnawed at him, casting a shadow over their remaining time together. One evening, as they lay side by side on a blanket under the stars, Adam turned to her, a serious expression on his face. "I know we've only just started this, but I don't want it to end when we go back to school. I don't want distance to change things between us." Janet reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "I don't want that either, Adam. I want to be with you, no matter what." He felt a surge of relief, his grip on her hand tightening. "We'll make it work, Janet. I'll come to visit and you can come see me. We'll call each other, text, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." She smiled, her gaze soft. "You won't lose me, Adam. We've waited this long, haven't we? A little distance can't change what we have." They lay there, content in the silence, both of them feeling the weight of the promises they'd made. It wasn't just about the summer anymore. It was about the future they both wanted, a future they'd never dared to imagine until now. As the last days of summer drifted by, Adam and Janet found solace in each other's presence, a quiet certainty filling them. They knew they were embarking on a new chapter, one that would bring its own challenges, but they were ready. The uncertainty of the future didn't matter. They were in this together, and that was enough. As summer turned to fall, Adam and Janet found themselves back at their respective colleges, separated by miles but connected by a bond stronger than either of them had ever known. At first, the distance was difficult. They missed the easy closeness of being able to simply walk across the street to see each other. But they were both determined to make it work, their summer together having forged something they weren't willing to let slip away. They made a ritual of Sunday night video calls, catching up on each other's week, sharing stories, laughter, and the occasional vent about a difficult class or a demanding professor. They sent each other texts throughout the day, small reminders that, no matter the distance, they were always on each other's minds. Adam would often wake up to a sweet message from Janet, and she'd smile each night at a photo he'd send, a simple reminder that he was thinking of her before he went to bed. The first semester flew by, and by winter break, they were more than ready to be back in each other's arms. The moment Adam saw Janet standing in the familiar town square, her eyes lighting up as she spotted him, he knew he'd made the right choice. He rushed over, pulling her into a tight embrace, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her presence. It felt like coming home all over again. Winter break was filled with small adventures, cozy nights by the fire, and quiet moments that reminded them why they'd fallen in love. They strolled through town hand in hand, shared hot chocolate at the diner, and laughed over childhood memories as if no time had passed at all. Being together felt as natural as breathing, and both of them knew they'd found something rare, a love rooted in friendship, grown over years, and blossomed in its own time. As the years passed, they continued to build a life together, navigating the challenges of college, long distance, and eventually their own careers. They both grew individually, supporting each other's dreams and cheering on each other's successes. Adam took up a graduate program in environmental science, while Janet found herself drawn to health and wellness, eventually becoming a counselor to help others struggling with self-confidence and body image. Her own journey had given her the empathy and insight to make a real difference in people's lives, and Adam couldn't have been prouder. Their relationship, though not without its challenges, deepened with every passing year. They traveled to each other's campuses, spent summers together, and even introduced each other to new friends, who quickly became mutual friends, solidifying their shared world. And every time they were together, that familiar spark, the comfort of friendship woven with the thrill of love, reminded them how lucky they were to have found each other. A few years after college, Adam and Janet found themselves back in Maplewood, standing by the old riverbank where they'd first confessed their love to each other. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the water, and a soft breeze stirred the leaves, just as it had that summer long ago. Adam reached into his pocket, his heart racing as he pulled out a small velvet box. Janet looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise, and he dropped to one knee, his voice trembling with emotion. "Janet, you've been my best friend, my confidant, and my love for as long as I can remember. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, unable to find the words. She pulled him up, wrapping her arms around him as he slipped the ring onto her finger, their laughter mingling with the sound of the river. In that moment, everything felt complete. The years of friendship, the seasons of waiting, and the love that had grown so deeply over time. Their love was a testament to patience, to growing together and apart, to finding each other again and again through every change. And as they stood together, wrapped in each other's embrace, they knew they'd built something beautiful, a love worth waiting for, a friendship turned romance, a promise to walk through life side by side. Adam and Janet left the riverbank hand in hand, stepping into the future they'd dreamed of, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together.